There are some sounds that just give me goosebumps to this day. There are some sounds that can strike fear into your heart in an instant. And believe it or not, there are some sounds that can haunt your dreams for a lifetime. You probably think I'm exaggerating, but try listening to these sounds late at night with all the lights turned off. I guarantee you won't be able to sleep after hearing them. From demonic whispers to possessed children, here are 5 horror stories about voices that will haunt your dreams forever. No. 5. The voice in the static. There was a man who used to listen to AM radio while he was driving home from work every single evening. This went on for many years, and one night in particular stood out among the rest. He was tuning through stations when he landed on one that had nothing but static. But then, above the static, he heard a voice. It said, "Beware of the man in the car," and then static returned to the radio. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, the product of his own fear of driving late at night. But the next night he heard it again, the same voice whispering the exact same message. "Beware of the man in the car." It kept happening every single night. Every time he tuned in that radio to that station, the same voice would tell him to beware of the man in the car. Was this a warning to him? Was someone trying to let him know that someone else was in his car? Or was it something more sinister? He never found out because he stopped driving at night altogether. No. For the demonic voice. A woman in Texas was going through a very difficult period in her life. She had recently gone through a divorce, and she couldn't find a job anywhere. She felt like everything in her life was falling apart. So she decided to visit a psychic to see if he could help her get back on track. That's when the psychic told her that her house was haunted by a demon. According to the psychic, the demon had been living in her home since the 1970s, and it was feeding off her sadness. He told her the only way to stop the demon was to perform an exorcism. She didn't believe him at first, but then she started hearing strange noises around the house. Things that sounded like footsteps, whispers, and even screams. One day she was home alone when she heard a voice that seemed to come from nowhere. It said, "Why are you here?" The voice scared her so much that she ran and hid in the closet until her friends came over. She still doesn't know whether or not the voice was from the demon, or if it was just her imagination. But ever since that day, she has never been able to live in that house again. Number 3. The whispering walls. If you've ever stayed in an old building before, you know how creepy they can be. Old buildings have a way of holding onto sounds and smells that seem to linger for decades. And this can make staying in an old building feel like more of an experience than just a place to lay your head at night. Some people say old buildings are haunted, and that the spirits that reside in them sometimes like to communicate with guests. Take, for instance, the story of a woman who was staying in an old inn in England. She was staying in one of the rooms upstairs, when she began hearing what sounded like whispers coming from the walls. At first she thought it was just part of the old building settling, but then she realized that the whispers were getting louder and more frequent. One night she woke up in the middle of the night and heard a voice that seemed to come from right next to her ear. It said, "Get out," and then the voice disappeared. She spent the rest of the night in her bed, paralyzed with fear. When the sun came up, she got out of bed and went to the front desk to ask if anyone else had heard the voice. The innkeeper looked at her strangely and asked, "Which voice?" And that's when she realized that she was the only person who could hear it. She checked out of the inn immediately and never looked back. To this day, she still doesn't know what the voice was or why it wanted her to leave. Number 2. The child in the attic. When a man moved into his new home, he was excited to start fresh. He had put in an offer on the house and had been waiting for months for it to be accepted. Finally, the day had come when he could move in and start planning his future in the home. But that excitement quickly turned to dread when he started hearing strange noises coming from the attic. At first, they were just small, like footsteps and muffled voices. But then they started to get louder and more frequent. He could hear the sound of children running around the house and playing. Sometimes he would hear the sound of laughter, other times the sound of screams. He tried to ignore it at first, thinking that it was just his imagination. But then one day he couldn't take it anymore. He went up into the attic to see what was making all the noise, and that essed when he saw it. There was a small opening in the wall where a child could crawl through. On the other side he could hear voices. Lots of voices. He called the police, and they helped him open up the wall to find out what was on the other side. But when they opened it up, they found nothing but bricks. He still hears the voices to this day, and no one can explain it. No one. The voice from beyond. There was a man who was working as a night watchman in an old abandoned hospital. He had been working there for several months and had never had any problems until one night in particular. He was doing his usual rounds when he heard a voice that seemed to come from the basement. The voice was raspy and weak, and it said, "Help me." He froze in his tracks and listened intently, hoping to hear it again. And then he heard it once more. "Help me." He didn't know what to do, so he called the police and told them what had happened. They searched the basement thoroughly, but found no one. That's when they told him that he was probably just hearing things. He went back to his post, but the voice kept calling out for help. So he quit his job on the spot and never went back. Some say that the voice is still echoing through those halls to this day, waiting for someone to hear it and finally put an end to its suffering. These are just a few of the many stories that people have shared about hearing voices that have changed their lives forever. If you've ever experienced something similar, I encourage you to share your story below. Who knows? You might just help someone who is going through the same thing. But now it's time for you to make your voice heard. What's the scariest sound you've ever heard? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.